everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. This is our regular series we do on Thursdays where we talk about some aspect of creating music, composition, arranging, improvisation, playing by ear, all the aspects that have to do with the creative act of making music. And as we have been for the last month or so, and will be for the next month or so, we're going to be delving into harmony today. We're going to be looking at work done for the Harmony and Chord Progressions course, and we'll look at some of the things that have been submitted, and I'll give some of my comments, and we'll learn a few new things, do some exercises. It's going to be a good session. I think you'll enjoy this. So let's start by taking a look at what we were doing. Wait a minute. I get my right thing up here. Is this the one? Nope. I got so many open windows. Is this the one I want? Yes, this is the one I want. Okay. We're going to take a look at some of the music that has been submitted for some of the assignments coming up until now that I want to revisit and give some comments on here. So what we're going to look at here is this is just a comment about inversions, and we've been having this discussion, and I just posted another lesson, and I want to talk about it in a little more detail. And so anyhow, this post here, I think, from Rod is like a really interesting example. And I just want to take a look at this, both in terms of his use of how he's fitting the melody to the chords, but also in terms of his use of inversions. And it's going to be some interesting things to talk about here. So give me just a moment to get that chat set up here so I can be following along. And we're going to check out a few things here. So let's first listen to this original melody. So that's a nice melody, right? It fits the chords nicely. And he's labeled where his passing tones were and so forth. So I think this was a really good way of approaching this. And I'm going to encourage people when you post projects to, show your work a little bit, put some of these little annotations so I know what's going on. I want to talk now about this melody, which is what happens when we swapped out the chords. You may remember the very first assignment had to do with swapping out the chords. Taking the original chords and taking the chords from the second two measures and putting them into the first two measures and vice versa, with no expectation that it's going to sound good, but to make you really think about what does and what doesn't sound good. So here he's done a version where he made no changes whatsoever. And I'm going to play this myself so I can play it with some reasonable voicings. And I want to talk about what works and what doesn't. Whoops, sorry. So the purpose of this course is to open our ears to some new sounds, because obviously if you're happy with the sounds that you already know how to make, you wouldn't be interested in learning about new sounds. And so I want to take a look at what's going on here and talk about how I can actually come to peace with almost all of this as is. So by playing the C minor with the fourth in the melody and then leaping to a chord tone, the seventh here. This at F7 with a G in the melody and then leaping down to another chord tone. This is reasonable. This is a reasonable melody to have over those chords. It is not at all what we would expect normally, but that's part of the purpose here, is to open up ears a little bit and accept some sounds that you're not otherwise familiar with. And these are sounds that, are common from the post-romantic era. This use of upper extensions like the 11th over that chord, the 9th over this chord, this all becomes common latter half of the 19th century and throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. it's largely a matter of voicing things well. So in figuring out how to get your voice leading working to make this sound good, which is one reason I'm focused on getting people to be able to play these things on the piano and not just trusting MuseScore's playback. So far, I'm completely happy with it. It's lovely to me. This is not, right? This is an avoid tone. So if I were to change something, I might change that one note. Just change that E flat here from E flat to D. So we have, and then everything after that. Here again, putting the 11th in the melody. Yeah, you don't end the piece necessarily that way, but it's a common sound in any, basically Debussy on, Chopin on, this idea that we're going to maybe hit these upper extensions a little bit harder. So depending on the sound you're going for. Now, if you're not going for a post-romantic sound, if you're going for a more Baroque sound or an early classical period sound or a Renaissance sound, then by all means don't do these things, and then you'd want to adjust the melodies. But those are the conscious decisions I want you making. So then the next thing I wanted to take a look at was Rod's use of some inversions and what he did here. So he's changed up some chords quite a lot here, but let's talk about what's going on. So these are all like different chords now, right? So I'm not sure exactly where all these chords came from. I think he's just trying some new chords entirely. But I want to talk about the use of inversions here and then compare it to his other versions where he changed some stuff around now to use different inversions. So my observation here is, yeah, he made this really important change. Notice what he did here by just changing from, so he's got an inversion here, and then an inversion in the second part of the measure. Then he has, in the original version, he jumped right to this inversion, F7 with an E flat in the bass. But in this version, he allows it to start in root position, then walk down. That's what you want. This is the really common type of sound that we're looking for. I mean, I guess I would say it's not like we're only looking to make the most common kinds of sounds in the world, but we're not looking to invent entirely new chords or entirely new combinations of chords. That's not our goal here, because if you do that, just buy a dartboard and get some darts and throw it at the dartboard and you got some new chords that no one's ever used before. What we're looking for is patterns that are a little beyond just the simplistic things that everyone might do, but really capture part of the sophistication of what's been going on in harmony for the last 400 years. So with that in mind, this idea of taking a 5 chord in root position, then walking down with the 7th in the bass, and then coming to the 1 chord in first inversion, that is just such a powerful, powerful sound. And it is all over music going back to the Baroque era. And so that is a sound you want to be familiar with and use your inversions purposefully to create specific things like that have that ring of familiarity, that are going to remind people of what Bach did, remind people of what Beethoven has done. And now you are borrowing their language rather than just trying out some inversions to see what happens. If there's anything that I want you to get about inversions based on, that lesson that I just posted. I hope people have had a chance to check that out. But if not, please definitely do. I just posted, like yesterday, the day before, a new lesson specifically on trying to get inside the use of inversions a little bit and trying to show you, well, where are they appropriate? Where are they less appropriate? And anyhow, I thought this particular piece of Rod's was a great example. Just first of all, a nice melody, a nice opportunity to talk about how we can possibly accept that melody over different chords, and also to talk about the things that he's done with inversions here. So those are some things I wanted to talk about there. I'm going to skip. I've got a few different things that I wanted to make sure I highlighted today. And by all means, as always, you can be asking me questions here. I'm always open for questions. I just want to point out, Lonnie has a video that she posted, and I take it back. I'm going to come back to this one. We're going to look at this diatonic reharmonization here that Michael did of Celito Lindo. And a few people have chosen this piece, which is nice because it's actually kind of a hard piece to deal with, I think. It's kind of hard to get it to feel like it makes harmonic sense with anything other than the most simplistic chords. But I think Michael did just such a fabulous job that I want to highlight this here. I'm pulling up my chat on the other side here just to make sure there's not anything weird going on where I'm missing things. Okay. So I'm going to play this piece myself, slowly stopping at places, and just talk about some of the things that are really nice about this. Okay. So right off the bat, I didn't play what he wrote. I played something else. I'm going to play what he actually wrote. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to observe about this piece, and one of the things that's complex about it, is the rhythm of it. Well, first of all, being in 3/4, anytime we're trying to do anything with harmony, we get to make a choice. Are we going to go with one chord per measure, or are we going to go with one chord per beat? And those are always fair choices. But in 4/4, you have a really good option usually of 2 chords per measure as sort of your average harmonic rhythm. In 3/4, you're always going to have issues with 2 chords per measure about where does that second chord go? Does it go on beat 2? Does it go beat 3? Or does it go somewhere in between? Celito Lindo takes that and complicates it further by having this syncopation, or hemiola, you might want to think of it as. It's as if it's in 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? It almost feels like the melody is in 2, despite the fact that the underlying pulse is actually 3. 1, 1, 2, 3. I gotta get that. 1, 2, 3. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The fact that those ones keep coming in at places where there's no note, right? There's no note on 1. It's this note tied over from beat 3. That's a form of syncopation. And so it's syncopation going on, but also when I talk about hemiola is that idea of superimposing kind of a 2/4 on top of 3. So just figuring out how to make those things work harmonically. Where are your chords going to go? It makes it complicated. It makes it hard to make these decisions of where are you going to put the chords, because the rhythm is already a bit off kilter. And so that's why this piece is a bit challenging. So, Jock, I see your question about Roman numeral format. So unfortunately, as with some other things in music, it's not totally standardized. I wasn't aware that Berkeley used the uppercase, all Roman numerals uppercase. I thought that process had mostly died out, say, 100 years ago in the United States. I see it mostly in Great Britain and or the UK, I should say. Is Great Britain, is that still a term used? I don't even know. Or UK, United Kingdom. But in any case, Most places in the United States these days use capital for major, lowercase for minor, and also augmented capital, diminished lowercase. Anything with a major third capital, anything with a minor third lowercase. That is by far the most common thing in the United States, and I think most of the world as well. But definitely in the UK and in a few other places, you will see, and older publishers like 19th century and earlier, you will see that capital letters for minor as well, with some additional indication like an M or something. So, so yes, you will see capital 2 Roman numeral with then an M next to it to mean the minor 2 chord. It's a system like John Mahegan, I think, works. There's a few specific music theorists, authors who use that notation, but it's definitely a minority. And so I don't use that one myself. My materials use capital for major, lower, and lowercase for minor. But you know, if you're accustomed to seeing the other style where it's all capital, as long as you're clear about what you're doing when you write it, and I can read what you're writing, and you're understanding what I'm writing, and so you can understand me, it's okay if we write our things differently, as long as we each understand each other. So there you go. Excuse me, frog in my throat. Water. So I'm gonna keep playing through this piece. Oh, I got to start it over because it is so cool going into that bar 9. All right. So I'm really curious about the Great Britain thing and what's going on. Is that like was that a political thing that happened in naming, or does it have to do with the whole Commonwealth? I just don't even know what's up with that. Okay, but coming back to the chords then. So these are all nice diatonic chords. 1, 2, 5. Hard to argue with that. 1, 2, 5. And here he's using that stepwise motion. And I might have let it be a G7 in root position, then the G7 in the inversion, rather than leaping into that inversion. But then going to 4 and diatonic chords. All really nice. And then this, though, progression normally would just be, would all be just 2s and 5s back and forth. But he's hit on this really brilliant idea that we can work our way back on the circle of fifths and go with a 3, 6, 2, 5, right? And I've never heard the tune done that way, but it fits perfectly. So it's a great example of not going with what you know works or what you've heard before, but trying out an idea that theoretically is sound, checking, does it work with the melody? And then discovering, hey, it does. And now you've created something really rather new. I mean, those are all chord tones other than like that one, you know, those are all chord tones. That B is kind of held over as it's a suspension, right? Held over from the E minor chord. And then it resolves and then comes down to the 7th, which resolves down by step and then jumps down to the root. And then that's still a chord tone. So, right, I mean, that chord progression fits that melody beautifully, even though it has nothing to do with how the piece was originally done. It's like magic when those things work out. So, yeah, it's interesting. I'm enjoying seeing the discussion about UK and Great Britain and how this all works. And I'm sorry for, you know, being the, you know, the stupid American who doesn't really understand most of the rest of the world. I mean, I know these are things, I just don't really. So UK includes, okay, Great Britain. So great, and that's the other thing is like England versus Great Britain. Great Britain, I always think of as encompassing more than England, but less than UK apparently. It's still not clear to me. Anyhow, then he's got this nice, this is the 2 chord. in first inversion, which creates the illusion basically of a 4 chord. Anytime you have the 2 chord in first inversion, it basically makes it more like the 4 chord, F. And then he resolves it deceptively, which is just beautiful. Now, circle of fifths. Can't argue with that either. Normally it would have been C going to F or something like that. Those would be the normal chords there. So Great Britain is England, Wales, and Scotland. Okay, that's good to know. Normally it would just be 1 going to 4, but what he's done is swapped out the 4 with a 2, and then circle a fifth leading up to it. And now he's got, because we can only have not diatonic chords in here, he's putting an A minor chord here. We're going to come back to that in a second. It fits. It's something to do. Then he's got another 2-5-1 with the 2 in first inversion, which is all lovely. And then 5, and he's got the 5 chord written as G7 sus to honor the fact that that C is still held over in the melody. And if you wanted to, you could resolve it to a plain G7 at the end of that measure. So resolve it on the end of the measure if you want. And again, he's found the circle of fifths working. Here, you have to be okay with that 11th in the melody, but it's, or 4th as you want to see it. And those are always fine over minor chords. They provide color. But in this case, it's resolving by step. So it's, okay, even by classical or Baroque standards, as long as you resolve it. And then totally fine. These are all chord tones, right? So it's all resolving along the circle of fifths. And then again, he's got the 2-5-1 with the 2 chord in first inversion. Margie, you're asking if sus has multiple meanings. Well, it might in some worlds, but in music, in chord symbols, no, it always means suspension. It literally means suspended. And so the technical definition is a suspension in the classical sense of a note like C held over from the previous measure that's held into the next measure and then hopefully resolves. So it always means that sound. In point of fact, we use that sound of this chord with this note in it, even if it's not technically held over from the previous measure, even if it doesn't resolve. We still refer to this sound as a sus chord. But yeah, the sus always means this idea of a note that is a non-chord tone that we are playing in place of a chord tone. So that's always its meaning, a non-chord tone being used in place of a chord tone. So if you just see sus with no number after it, it always means the 4th replacing the 3rd, because that's by far the most common situations. You'll occasionally see things like sus2, where someone means to play the 2nd instead of the 3rd and then resolve it. And then people argue about, well, did it really mean this? Play the 2nd instead of the root and then resolve it. That's a reason to never use that chord symbol, because it doesn't really mean anything. But it doesn't mean one specific thing, I should say. So anyhow, this piece uses the circle of fifths in some beautiful ways and unexpected ways in terms of how it hits the melody. So for that reason, I find it to be really, really useful to do what we're about to do with it. We're going to now jump forward and start talking about secondary dominants, which is now the topic of the day. I want to see how many places I can just change a chord into a secondary dominant where it's not now. So, for instance, the question is, could this D minor 7, could I make that a secondary dominant? And the answer is yes, I can. And by yes, I can, I mean the 5 chord in the key of G would be D7, right? D7 would be the 5 of 5, and D7 works with that A. So I totally could have done this. And I could do it again. So I could do that. I could make that D7, D minor 7, into a D7. But then I have a choice, because notice these first 4 bars are basically that same chord progression twice in a row. Now you get to ask yourself the more subjective question, the one where you get to now make some more personal decisions here. When do you want that sound? So this is the idea that I kind of started off talking about when I was, trying to get everyone excited about this course before we started, is the connection between what we learn theoretically and the sound of it. So it's one thing to just theoretically know I can plop this chord in, I can plop this chord in here, but then somehow we have to decide about the sound of it if we like that sound and make evaluations. So I'm going to give you my subjective sense here. If that chord progression is going to repeat, I like it diatonic the first time. And then maybe use the secondary dominant the second time. And this time I did put the G7 in root position first and then resolved it. I feel like that's a little stronger, especially coming off that secondary dominant. I didn't like the idea of jumping from that secondary dominant into an inversion, leaping in the bass into an inversion. I'm not saying we can never leap into inversions, but we do that at the starts of phrases, not in the middle of a 2-5. So typically in the middle of a 2-5 like that, you're not going to leap into an inversion like that. Yeah, I think I'm overgeneralizing, but I'm just talking out loud. So here's the thing. I am now going to play that chord progression 4 times. And I'm going to sneak the secondary dominant in one of those 4 times. Is he going to be number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4? And I just want everyone in the chat to type in the number when you hear it. Okay, so when you hear when you hear the third, if you hear me do it on the 3rd time through, type in 3 in the chat. If you hear me do it on the 2nd time through, type 2 in the chat. If you hear me do it on the 4th time through, type 4 in the chat. If you hear me do it on the 1st time through, type 1 in the chat. All right, I want you to listen and hear the difference between the minor. So there's the diatonic version. Here's the secondary dominant version. Here, I just want you to hear what it sounds like, that it's that secondary dominant. I'm not even going to use the inversion, so I'm just going to stay everything in root position here. All right. I see Allison's talking about the capitalization and how it's done in 15th and 16th century music. And yeah, that there's, in 15th century music, we typically didn't think so much about chords to begin with. So the Roman numeral system is a little more recent than that as far as how it goes. So the chords are there. It's just that form of analysis didn't come along until a little later. All right, so I'm going to now, here again is the diatonic version. Here is the secondary dominant version. All right, so I'm just going to play that a bunch of times. And I'm going to play it 4 times, and I want you to tell me which one of those 4 has the secondary dominant. Only one of them will. Here we go. Here comes number 1. Here's number 2. Here's number 3. Here's number 4. Now, if you can see my hands at the keys, you may have noticed me play the F sharp. I know the chat is behind me a little bit, but I'm going to do it again. Don't look at my hands. Here it is again. I'm going to play exactly the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, which one of those 4 have the secondary dominant? That's the question for the chat. I want to see some answers here. And I want it to come from, having heard it, not just coming from looking at my hand on the keys. Which one of those was the secondary dominant? So the chat might be a little further behind than usual. Usually it feels like I'm only about 10 seconds behind, but I'm taking longer to get some answer. Margie says 2. I'm going to play it again here. Here's number 1. Here's 2. Here's 3. Here's 4. All right. Martha, you obviously did just get the chat to work because you just typed into the chat. So you must have succeeded. So I'm seeing mostly 3s. The 3s have it. The 3 is the right answer. I did it. Here's the first one was diatonic. The second one was also diatonic. Third one was when I used the F sharp. And then the fourth one, I came back to this. All right, so now I'm going to move on. Thanks for now for all the answers in here. I'm going to move on and just toss in some more secondary dominants. Let's go on. C, F. Well, if that is a C chord going to F, why not make that a secondary dominant? And, make this be C7. So totally could do that, right? I am looking right now for places where my chord is already moving along the circle of fifths. I'm not looking to replace any chords right now. I will talk about that. I'll talk about that in another lesson. I just recorded a demo last night that I will post a bit later. But about using secondary dominants, and I'll go through a process and show you a demonstration, give you a project and all that. So, but what I'm doing for right now is just taking existing chords that are already moving down a fifth and making them into secondary dominants by basically changing whatever note I need to. So C is already going down a fifth. It's already in that 5-to-1 relationship. This is already like 5-to-1 in the key of F. It's written, this measure. It's written in an inversion, but that's fine. It's still a 5-to-1 type of relationship in F. So all I'm doing is adding the 7th to make it a secondary dominant. In the case of the D minor, I had to raise the 3rd to make it a secondary dominant. That's the most common. But in this case, I had to add a 7th to make it a secondary dominant. That is basically the case whenever you have that situation. When you're trying to tonicize the 4 chord. When you're trying to tonicize the 4 chord, it means putting a 7th on your 1 chord. Now after this, we have not circle of fifths, so I'm not going to try to do anything there. And then that's also not circle of fifths from E minor to D. But from the D minor to G7, there's circle of fifths, right? That D is going down a fifth. So I want to find out, can I use D7 instead of D minor 7? So your affinity for that sound is going to depend on your affinity for jazz. And even in a jazz context, I'm going to say that that's pretty harsh. I probably wouldn't do that. I would use that sound, but not here. Not in this context. It's the wrong context for it. Sounds wrong. So I'm not going to try to make a D7 happen at the beginning of the measure. But can I sneak it in the middle of the measure? I think so. Totally. And I can make it a bass line, right? D minor to D minor with an F in the bass to D7 with an F sharp in the bass to D. I don't even know what I'm singing. So more secondary dominance there. I'm going to go on. What about this E minor 7? Okay, so I guess other people are having chat issues, huh? Interesting. Not sure what's up with that. Sorry, folks, if you're having issues with the chat. So now, because a couple people have mentioned it, I guess there must be something going on. So I guess if you're having problems with the chat, try refreshing your screen, try leaving and coming back, try all the standard things that may or may not work. Yeah, I can just hope for the best here. So we have circle of fifths here, which makes me think, I've got circle of fifths. I could potentially make these guys secondary dominants as well. So instead of E minor 7, I could try E7. And that totally fits the melody. Oops. Right? E7 to A minor. But the A minor is going down a fifth also, so that could all be at 7th. Right? Or I could let the E be minor and let the A be dominant. That one right there is actually what I would probably do naturally. So this is one of these things where there's not like a rule about it. And it's kind of like with inversions. I definitely recommend everyone watch that inversion lesson that I just posted the other day, because it's not telling you here's how you have to use them. It's telling you what's typical. And I'm about to make a similar observation about secondary dominants. When you have this 3, 6, 2, 5 progression, the most common thing to see is for the 3 to be minor, the 6 to be dominant, 2 to be minor, 5 to be dominant. In other words, alternating minor, dominant, minor, dominant. Sometimes we'll do dominance all the way. Sometimes we'll let the 3 be dominant. It could be different sorts of things. But that idea of singling out the 6 chord here to make it dominant is the most common. And I think I can give you even a reason why. So I'm going to play it that way first. Minor, dominant, minor, dominant. I think what's going on is the following. This is a 4-measure phrase. 4-measure phrases are super common, right? So 4-measure phrases are common, and if we break them down into 2-measure phrases, I can say this is a little 2-measure phrase, and then that's a 2-measure phrase. So I'm breaking down my 4-measure phrase into 2 2-measure phrases, and this position, the second measure of the phrase, is the weak position. I don't even know what that word really means here, but what it means here is it's about creating momentum into the start of the next phrase. And I think that's why dominance in this position, in the second bar of a 2-bar phrase, seeing the dominant 7th there to pull you in to the start of the next phrase, because that's where we want the emphasis to be, is the start of that 2-bar phrase. So this is where we really want that dominant sound, is in that second bar. And then we can land on a minor chord and be perfectly happy, and then we have our dominant chord there. So that's a generally common thing to see, is this idea of minor dominant in that order, specifically along the boundaries of these 4-bar phrases, so that the dominants occur in the even numbered measures. It's not a rule you have to follow. It's a thing that commonly sounds good because it just fits the structure of most musical phrases. So I'm going to keep going, though, with a little bit with this because it's fun. Here's the next phrase. So D minor 7. I could try to make that a dominant 7th, but no, it isn't going to work because it's got a 4th in the melody. And if I made it a sus chord, I guess I could do that, because that's how I eliminate that problem of having the 4th in the melody, is say, oh, I'll play it as a sus chord. But when I do that, now the 3rd's not there. And now it's like, well, is it even a dominant at all if there's no 3rd there? So, and I think Jimmy had mentioned that in, I don't know if you're here today. I don't remember if I've seen you in the chat, but Jimmy had mentioned about a Tchaikovsky piece where there was a 7th chord that seemed like maybe it was supposed to be a secondary dominant, but there was no 3rd in it. And so you really had no way of knowing. And I would say the same here. If I play this chord here, I don't know if this is D minor 7 or D7 because it doesn't have a 3rd. So I could play it, but it doesn't really give me the secondary dominant thing. So I'll just leave it alone. That deceptive resolution is really nice, as is, but, and I want you to sing this line with me. So sing this bass line with me as I play these four measures. Sing that with me again. Oh, sorry, I messed up. I'm trying to do three things at once. Okay. I know I'm sliding in my pitch. One more time. Now, we're going to do one little thing. This deceptive resolution, 5 going to 6, you're totally welcome to use that as is, 5 going directly to 6. But here's a common trick. It's going to work every time you got 5 going to 6, in a major key anyhow. Instead of going directly to 6, we're going to throw in a passing chord. So from 5, from my G chord, I'm going to an E chord in first inversion. And so my bass line is going right? To G sharp somewhere in that gap there, going to the A minor, and that G sharp is basically the third of the secondary dominant E7. So this time we're gonna sing that, and I'm gonna put it on beat 3. We're gonna do it in slow motion. We're gonna sing bum 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 while I play it, and I want you to sing that with me. Da, 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 da. Let's do that again. Da, 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 da. One more. Da, da, da. My singing, not great, so yours doesn't have to be great. It's about hearing the thing, and I'll do it without playing it so that you do. I'll do it without singing it so you can hear it. So I'm using that secondary dominant in first inversion to connect the 5 to the 6. Super, super common technique. It's so common that I fear I overdo it, because there's something nice about letting 5 go directly to 6 as well. And I probably too often don't let 5 go directly to 6. I'll have a situation where I want 5 go to 6. I'm like, oh, I know this cool thing I can do. And I do that cool thing all the time when I probably shouldn't. So I'm going to keep going on. Now we've got another circle of fifths progression. And so I'm going to try that same technique of 3, 6, 2, 5, except this isn't 5, but I'm still going to try to put my A7 in that second bar. All right, well, that's not going to work for 2 reasons. The 4th in the melody is the avoid tone, and then the minor 3rd here, right? Way too clashy. So I'm going to have to keep A minor as is. But can I make the E the dominant 7th? Yes, I can. And then I could make that D minor be either minor or dominant, right? I could make it either way. So I could totally do that. And the thing is, just like at the beginning of the piece, remember how at the beginning of the piece I saw 2 D minors in close proximity and decided, well, I'm going to make one a secondary dominant and not the other for variety's sake, and chose to make the second one. Actually, I don't know if I made that clear, but that's how I would do it. I would make the second one. I'd state it diatonically first, then put in the secondary dominant. I'm feeling that same thing here. So I feel like I would put in the minor 2 chord here, and then 2 bars later, let it be the dominant one. So I guess chat's not, if chat's not working, I definitely apologize. There's nothing I can do about that, and sorry about that. But hopefully at least it's still, even if you can't, because I am seeing some chat messages, but I guess I just don't know what's going on with the chat. But if you're ever able to get in, go ahead and, put in your comments when you can. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play this D minor as a minor, but I'm going to play this one as a secondary dominant. Sorry. Minor, dominant. So I played D7 with an F sharp in the bass instead of D minor 7 with F in the bass. Yeah. So dominant to minor, and then I went with minor, and then I played this chord as written, and then secondary dominant, D minor over F sharp to G7, going to C. So, and hopefully, even if you can't access the chat, you can still hear. Hopefully you can still hear, because that'll be the main thing, and that'll mean the recording is still good. Because, yeah, I'm not getting any weird internet issues. I'm checking my phone. My watch, which tells me notifications, but I'm not seeing anything telling me that there's any system-wide issues. So I want to come back to this A minor chord. If I've got a D, and then I'm leaving it and then coming back to another D, I really want an E. So Jock, you might be saying the same thing that I'm about to say, but I'm not positive. So maybe, Jock, if you can tell me which measure number you mean, that might help. Because I don't know which D minor you use. This D minor here. I'm going to guess that you mean this D minor right here. Could I use E7? Well, certainly the E7 would tonicize the A minor. But first of all, E7 isn't going to support the A in the melody. That's going to clash. But also, this A minor here, my point here is that this is not an important chord. So this idea of knowing that some chords are the important chords and some chords are just how I get to the important chords, this is one that you develop through experience, and I'm doing my best to impart my experience. Remember when I talked about the odd and even measures, and that the odd numbered measures were the strong ones, and those are the ones you want to make sure you target. The weak measures, the middles of the second bars of these 2-bar phrases, they're usually there just to get you to the next place. So this doesn't need to be A minor, is I guess what I would say. I would rather have this be a secondary dominant. I'd rather have this be A7 going into D minor. So if I land on the D minor, I would much rather have an A7 here. So Michael, I think, knew that, but deliberately didn't do it because he was trying to stay diatonic. But here's the one place where it really wanted secondary dominant. And then you can come back to D7 if you want. So E7 to A minor to D minor, A7, D7, and I used his inversions. E7 to A minor to D minor, A7 with the E in the bass, D7 with F sharp in the bass, to G7. So I'm using secondary dominants, and other than that one place where I snuck in that E7 chord, right, I snuck in a chord between the 5 and the 6, I'm mostly not adding new chords. I'm just changing existing chords to make them secondary dominants. And so that's what I'm doing. And then this next phrase is a 3-6-2-5, and I'm going to try the same technique. Minor to dominant to minor to dominant. And it works beautifully here. So I'm not going to question it. And now here we've got 2-5-1. And I could make it could totally make it the secondary dominant 2. I could make it dominant 2 if I wanted. So, this piece, first of all, yeah, I spent so long on this piece because there was so much to unpack about it. First of all, just the really nice job that Michael did with a difficult piece rhythmically to sort out how he could put in chords and ending up with some chords that really are unusual compared to how this tune usually goes, which really is all about the 1, 4, and 5. And by packing in so many of these circle of fifths progressions that were totally unexpected to me, it gave us opportunity to try out secondary dominants really easily. So this is going to be my challenge to you, is the pieces, when you worked on your diatonic harmonizations, whether it was Ashgrove or one of the other pieces, when you worked on those, anytime you were able to get circle of fifths happening, I want you now to revisit and say, well, I've got circle of fifths from E minor to A minor. Can I change that E to E7? Or could I change, if you've got A minor to D minor, can I change that A minor to A7? Anytime when you already have circle of fifths, can you change it to a secondary dominant? Or maybe can you just squeeze one in between two existing chords that are not moving on the circle of fifths? I want you experimenting with these things with the music you've already been working on, because then the next project that I'm going to give is, I want you to start over with a new song and really start pushing the idea of secondary dominance. So I spent a long time dealing with different aspects of this piece because, I thought it was super important to do some of these things. I just want to take another check, check on another piece here, and I just want to take a look at something that David Griffiths did with the Ashgrove, just to talk about a similar issue, a similar type of thing we're going to do with this piece. First, though, Jock's question: when deciding when to use a secondary dominant, consider both the chord and whether conflicts with melody. Yes, absolutely. So you want to say, first of all, is this a place where a secondary dominant makes sense? Does it feel like my ear is telling me I want a secondary dominant there? How do you know that? First, by listening to a lot of music and knowing where the secondary dominants are. Asking yourself, where did I like it? Where did this happen? This is training your ear to like secondary dominants. The analogy I often make in this sort of thing is to cooking. If you've never tasted cumin before, you're going to have no idea. Someone could give you a jar of cumin and you're going to have no idea when to use it. You could start randomly sprinkling it on ice cream and other things, trying to figure out, how am I going to use this stuff? But until you have actually had a dish properly prepared using cumin in traditional ways and then been shown, oh, this is the cumin taste, and you taste it in the context, oh, that's how it's supposed to taste when combined with beans and tomatoes, etc. That's how you then start to know when you're tasting a dish that doesn't have cumin, I think cumin would taste good here. I can't tell you how to know that other than just by giving you a lot of food that's got cumin in it and talking through it. So this is what we're doing with secondary dominance. I'm teaching you to recognize when it might be a good opportunity to use a secondary dominant based on experience with other things that use it. But in the end, Jock, absolutely, you need to look at the melody to decide, is it going to actually work here? Because if it isn't, then you can't do it. All right. So I just want to point out a couple things here with Ashgrove. I would love to be able to make this a secondary dominant, an E7, to go to the A minor, but I can't because the melody conflicts. So I can't use my secondary dominant there. Oh well. Now, could I put an A7 in that third bar? Well, maybe not at the beginning because of the C natural and the melody, but maybe I could do it on beat 3. Right? I could do it on beat 3. And by the way, that thing of playing first the diatonic 2 chord, then the dominant 2 chord, that's a pretty common thing to see happen. I mean, we just did it in the other piece, right? Maybe not right in a row, but we had minor 2 and then dominant 2 a little bit later. Putting them directly next to each other is pretty common also. And in those cases, you might consider using an inversion so that the changing note is in the bass. That is a common situation for inversions. It's not necessary, but it's common. And then again, same trick here. Oops, sorry. A7 to get me to the next measure. So here's an important thing to realize about what I just did there, because maybe you caught on to this or maybe you didn't, but I need to be real explicit about it. I've got an A minor chord, and secondary dominants are all about resolution down a fifth. The question is, did that A minor chord go down a fifth here? Is this going down a fifth? From A minor to G. Is that going down a fifth? So it's a trick question, because the literal answer is no, it did not. It did not go down a fifth, right? It's going down a step from 2 to 1. But here's the thing. That 1 chord is in second inversion. Realistically, think of that 1 chord in second inversion and the 5 as like a package deal. It's just a fancy 1 chord. I've made that observation a few other places. 1, 6, 4 to 5. Think of it as just an expanded 5 chord. So this A really is going down to D7. It's just going down to a fancy D7. So it's totally okay to have A7 go to G in second inversion, because that G in second inversion is really just a D when that happens. I'm going to move on here and just, because I wanted to talk about the bridge also. I'm going to play David's chords. So totally works to have the minor chord there, and this was supposed to be a diatonic harmonization, but we're going to A minor, so why not make the E into E7? The reason David didn't is because we were trying to stay diatonic for that assignment, and I appreciated that. But that's a great opportunity to make it a secondary dominant. Here I made the comment, I think that E minor with the D in the bass doesn't really help at all, because the D, anytime you use an inversion, I really expect it to resolve by step, and it didn't happen there. So I'm just going to ignore that chord and stick with E7. A minor 7, D7. Here is the other place where secondary dominants are really useful. There's a D chord. We totally should have an A chord on that C sharp coming back to the D. We should totally, so this is 5 on the D. That C sharp should be 5 of 5. That should be an A chord going to the D. And again, we didn't do it because I said, let's stay diatonic. But that was the place where I knew going into it that realistically we're going to want a secondary dominant going in there. All right, so that is a lot of talk about secondary dominants, and I'm playing them so you can hear the effect of them and play with them. I want to do one last thing and come back to Lonnie's piece here, and you all are going to listen. So she made a comment about recording this piece and not being comfortable with how she played it, and she ended up adding a C sharp, and that's cheating, is what she said. So by cheating, what she means is she added a non-diatonic note, and it actually created a secondary dominant. We're going to listen to it, and you're going to tell me where that happens. We don't need to know anything else about it. There is one place where she added a secondary dominant, and I want to see if you can hear it. I'm going to try to count the measures as we do it, and that'll be the last thing we do here. Put it in the chat, and see if we can find an answer. So here we go with this video. Short. I'll count measures. You show me where the non-diatonic chord is. See if your ears can tell you. start over because I... Okay, I got to get the right tempo in my mind. Can you start this thing over? I guess I got to refresh the page. It's an annoying thing about YouTube Shorts is they don't give you any actual controls on them. I want you to tell me when you hear... I'm not holding up useful fingers, am I? All right, my finger counting, I made the mistake of counting, of going to 4 and starting over again. So this time I won't. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So the question is, in which of those measures was there a secondary dominant? Mariella has it. It was in bar. It was in the 6th bar. Margie, yes, absolutely. So it was something like this. It was a sort of a A7 sound going to the D minor sound. I want people to listen. And it was a little obscured because she didn't play just a pure triad. She had some voice leading stuff going on that she was doing. But I would encourage people to get that, to find that post and listen to it and see to what extent can you hear when that happens, if you had trouble finding it here, and be doing this for all the music you listen to. Try to listen and see when you can recognize secondary dominance by ear. You won't be able to do it at first, just like you won't know what cumin tastes like just because I gave you a jar of it. I need you to first study existing music where you know it is, listen to it there. Then you're like, okay, I think I know what one sounds like. Then start listening to see when you can hear it. Do it with pieces that you can listen to and follow along with the sheet music so you can instantly check your results. But I want you listening hard to really get the sound of that secondary dominant in your ear. All right, so all of that said, it is now time to wrap up. There's some secondary dominance in this piece, by the way. There was one right there. And yeah, there's secondary dominance all throughout this piece, actually. Here's going into D minor. Yeah, there's secondary dominance. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed the session. It's a lot to unpack here about secondary dominance, and we're going to spend a whole nother week on them with a whole project here. So we're going to hopefully really start creating some music that we can like really be proud of and listen to and say, wow, I've created something here using this sound that has been such a big part of music history for the last several centuries. Secondary dominants are the biggest sound that I need us to learn here. We've got lots more we're going to do after that, but let's really, really take seriously the scavenger hunt for secondary dominants and everything that we're doing with them. Make sure you really spend the time on it. So thanks, everyone, and I will see you next time. I'm sorry about chat issues.